Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Hoffner. I'm the Director of Project Management and Client Services for Senn Chemicals. Senn is a Swiss company located outside of Zurich, and they've been in business for about 49 years. And presently we do custom manufacturing of advanced intermediates and API and general GMP type work. So the topic today is outsourcing risks and benefits. So just a quick overview. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about current events, what we're seeing globally in terms of low quality of medicines and some counterfeits, some trends that we're seeing in outsourcing, some of the risks and benefits, which is the title of our topic, some strategies for sourcing raw materials, and specifically outsourcing in developing markets, some critical requirements, what do you outsource if you choose to outsource, and of course the purpose of outsourcing, staying competitive. So to my point, this morning I woke up and I watched the news, and again, a relevant news program of tainted vaccine causing deaths by meningitis. I guess 8 people in the United States passed away. And just globally, anytime you turn on the news, you'll see a different example of how low-quality medicines are being distributed to people, and how when you open your spam box, you can see the huge amount of counterfeit medicines that are being offered to you. So these are big risks, these are big challenges, and despite the risks, outsourcing activities are actually increasing. And not just to save money, which was the traditional way. Now, these developing countries that we're outsourcing in predominantly are huge markets for us. So this is not a plug for Nice Insight. I don't work for them. But they post some nice details on the internet, and one thing they do is they track some trends in outsourcing kind of quarterly. And this one was their recent update from June, where they looked at who's outsourcing from small pharma to emerging pharma to biopharma to large pharma. They had 2,000 respondents, and they asked them, if you could outsource, would you? And how many unique types of things would you outsource, whether it would be a clinical trial or development or GMP production, whatever. And as you can see, as you start from phase 1 all the way through to commercial, it does drop off as expected, but still a huge number of clients and companies are outsourcing, which is great. And in fact, they track this from quarter to quarter, and it seems like it's going up a little bit, which is great for a company like Senn, because we depend on our clients to outsource to us to make them their GMP intermediates and APIs. So when we see these trends, we're very happy. So just some risks. This is nothing new. I mean, these are standard things. Anybody that's ever purchased or done any kind of outsourcing knows that these are true. Obviously, a big concern is product quality. If it comes to you and it doesn't work, you can be in a whole heap of trouble. Or if it's not sufficient in terms of its quality, or there's some kind of a new impurity. Oftentimes, the company that you're working for might have insufficient regulatory or compliance. Maybe the documentation that comes to you, it's incomplete, or it's missing critical pieces, or it's not in English. My favorite is when I get a C of A. Now, no offense, but I work for a Swiss company. We speak English there, and when I get a C of A that's entirely in the Chinese language, I don't know what to do with it. So sometimes sometimes you have to work out those details. Also being Swiss, IP protection, it's just virtually impossible to protect your intellectual property in certain developing countries. Some companies have tried to get around it by buying a supplier, but even then, it's really difficult to safeguard. Obviously, when you outsource, your supplier can have either a lack of maturity or a lack of discipline. This has to do with, do they have proper change control? Are they really certified by the government regulatory body? Is that overseeing what they're doing? Since the market is booming and growing, many of the companies are new, so they're untested, they're untried, and their chemistries are not advanced. Culture, of course, it's not just language or dress or religion. It can be the intangibles, like how do you ask a question, how do you answer a question. They have whole courses and seminars on this, and it can't be underestimated. And one of my favorites is, and it's not really my favorite, it's dispute resolution. If you get something that doesn't quite meet what your expectations were, where do you go? Oftentimes you won't have a legal remedy and you'll be stuck. You won't get your money back, you won't get more material. So what do you do? So these are some of the common risks. And there's many more. All right, so the benefits. Quite obvious. Pricing. That's why we do it. Maybe we're a virtual company, we don't have any headcount too, okay? That's another reason, but predominantly cost. It's faster and cheaper, especially for the earlier parts of development. You can get you can shorten the overall timeline as well as lower some of those upfront costs. So, because outsourcing is essentially a necessity, and we're all going to be doing it, we have to consider how to do it while still protecting our supply chain. So where does my company, Senn, fit into all of that? Well, we're a typical CMO. We're a smaller size CMO. We've been in business for 49 years, and we specialize in peptides. And as a result, the majority of our raw materials and intermediates come from developing countries. So it's absolutely critical to our business that we source high quality, source reliable, and price to less of an extent suppliers. Our main focus is to try to get high quality and reliable suppliers, because if we can't find that, then we are going to go out of business just as quick. So, although the paradigm is a little bit different, looking at maybe outsourcing a clinical trial or outsourcing your final API being made versus what kind of Senn does, which is outsource a starting material or an intermediate or something like that. The paradigm's a little bit different, but a lot of the pitfalls, the problems, the solutions, those are quite applicable. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. It's how Senn approaches this issue. All right, strategies. All right. I almost didn't put this one up here because it's so obvious, but it's so often overlooked. I mean, I can't tell you how many product launches I've been around and we only had one supplier for a key raw. Don't do that. Or if you have to, immediately after launch, start looking for a second supplier, parallel path it, get some pre-samples, start looking at it. But please, don't wait till you run out and your plant's shut down for 6 months. All right. Keep strategic reserves of key raws. It's kind of like the first one. If you're a smaller company, this might not always be economically feasible. Also, too, in addition to the outlay of cash, maybe you don't have a lot of storage space. But the good news is, and those of you that outsource know this, there's a lot of companies that are willing to work with you that have much larger reserves in storage. And what we do is we buy a large quantity versus a call-off agreement. So we can purchase the material, they keep it in their stock. We don't actually pay a dime until we accept delivery. And most of the companies, and they haven't caught on yet, so don't tell them, are not charging finance charges, which quite frankly they could easily do, and justifiably. But we get it without a finance charge. The only thing that we have to do is make sure that we commit to pay for the whole batch and within a certain frame of time. And although there's some risk there, generally the benefit outweighs the risk. All right, this was a joke about 5-7 years ago, getting a ship sample or a pre-sample, because it never matched. You know, it would claim to be the same lot, but the impurity profile would be wholly different. There'd be random things in there. Oftentimes, you'd get the bulk, and it would have a different lot number, and you'd be like, but I thought the pre-sample was the same. And they're like, no, we just sent you the wrong documentation. Here's the real documentation now. And I was always reluctant to kind of do it because I didn't feel like it was any value added. But I have good news. Recently, it's been working great. Like, we get these pre-samples in, and they exactly match the bowl. And it gives us an opportunity to go to our key suppliers and say, can I get a sample of this? Can I get a sample of that? We bring it in, we test it, we pick the lot we want, and we make sure that it works for its intended use. And it's been working out great. So if you forgot about it because you had a bad experience in the past, you might want to take a second look at it. Okay, sharing stock. This is a hot button issue because oftentimes it involves a partnership with a competitor. Or you can just say somebody who's in the same supply chain. It's irrelevant in these days, but the idea is to increase your bargaining power, especially if you're a little company. You join with a competitor or somebody in your supply chain or even your client to buy a larger amount and then warehouse it together. This gives you more leverage with your suppliers and it can help you in the long run. Of course, the drawback is quite obvious. Maybe you have a contract agreement with your competitor and at a given point you're going to be both trying to get the same limited resource. And if you're dealing over a competition of a limited resource with your competitor, things can go south really quick. So the key there would be a good contract. A mutually profitable, mutually beneficial contract with clear dispute resolution included. Okay, so just a couple of very general case studies. We had this common reagent that we would purchase that you've probably purchased many times yourself. And this stuff we used to buy, hundreds and hundreds of kilos over many years. Never had a single problem with it. The vendor was qualified, everything was perfect. We were happy, they were happy, it was great. Then one time we got in a lot and we tested it like we normally do, and it was actually purer than the previous lot, so we thought everything was great. And we used it, and the batch failed. And actually, this caused us to open an investigation, and we quickly discovered that there was a presence of a sulfur compound inside this reagent that was causing major, major problems. And then we started to look at the company, and we realized this was so stupid that we didn't look before, but we didn't. They were making massive amounts of sulfur compounds in their factory. And we think it was just dumb luck that we never got a lot that had sulfur in it, so that we never identified this possible failure mode, so we didn't have a test against it. And so from this, we took away, know your suppliers. Who are they working with? What are their core competencies? Are they financially viable? Who is supporting them? Maybe it's the government, maybe it's not. Are they even legally allowed to sell to you? What else are they making in their factory? That was key here. But also, how do they make it? Stuff like that. So we do our very best effort to vet as many of our suppliers as we can to the best of our ability to find out what they're doing to try to stop these failure modes before they occur. Okay, test everything. This isn't actually my quote. An FDA inspector came in one time and told me that that's what he recommended, especially with the low quality of starting materials that he'd been seeing globally, and that the square root of n+1 wasn't working. Just test it all. And I'm kind of inclined to agree, especially because of what happened to us here. Obviously, we make peptides, as I mentioned, and amino acids are quite standard fare. You just buy them and they come in. And we had this supplier that we really loved, and they were giving us isoleucine, lots of it over the years. It was working great, so that they were qualified and we were able to do less testing. Then one time they delivered a lot with a higher than average amount of valine. And because we weren't testing for it, because we trusted them, it got through and we used it, and of course the material failed at the first step. So, what did we learn from that? Even if your supplier is qualified and they're great and you love them, test everything that could potentially affect your intended use. I know that might sound obvious, but we grew lax a little bit, and we learned from it. And of course, a quality agreement would have helped because these guys apparently in the background had changed the supplier and didn't tell us. So, All right, I think I already talked about that. But I used to look at these things like they were another piece of paper that I had to figure out how to sign and negotiate. It took hours and days. But believe me, it's absolutely worth it. Even for the little tiny supplier that gives you ethanol, it's worth it in the long run. It also can help you maybe get a lick, because everybody's part in the agreement is stipulated and the quality level is stipulated and change control is stipulated. If you do get something that's not quite right, maybe you'll have a legal remedy at that point. All right, so this is predominantly where Senn does a lot of our sourcing of our raws and intermediates. For us, quality and keeping the timeline is more important than price. Price is secondary. What we also recommend is if you always use a particular material, have one or two key suppliers that you fully vetted, and then in order to keep the relationship going, buy from one, then buy from the other, keep it going. Because you don't want to make B mad because you're only purchasing from A, and then when you really need B, they're not around. So try to balance it out. And then while you're doing that, look to build relationships with additional suppliers. And the stronger the relationship, the easier it is to negotiate price and more favorable delivery terms. One thing that we're doing is our very best to take our list of all the suppliers and just cross the names off. That's what we just systematically do, just in an effort to build that relationship. Now, because we do peptides, one of the things we keep in mind is geographical considerations when you're sourcing. There are three main areas in China where you can get things to make peptides: Chengdu, Suzhou, and Shanghai. So if you're looking in a geographical area, consider it. We only look for one or two suppliers in each of those regions. It would make no sense to have 5 in one. Because, by the way, they talk to each other. And just assume, because I've seen it and I've talked with them, it's not a big deal, actually. But you just have to know that they're doing it. I mean, from the Swiss perspective, we're highly, highly into confidentiality, and it freaks you out a little bit when you hear that people are talking between companies, but it happens. So just go in with your eyes open that that's happening, and that these guys are talking to each other about everything that you're asking them and about everything that other people are asking them about as well. Another key fact is, at least with dealing with China, is that every year in the province, you have to be recertified to sell. And it's a good idea towards the end of the year to begin to ask your vendors to provide new certificates for the following year, because your vendor in 2012 might not be legally authorized to sell anything to you in 2013. So make sure you find that out from them, especially if you're trying to do any GMP productions. And lastly, I don't know if you've experienced it, but oftentimes you go through all the trouble to qualify a supplier only to find out that they've gone out of business. So this also comes in to know your supplier. All right. So what's the critical requirement? This was another thing from Nice Insight. And I thought for sure the first thing would be price, but it was quality, just like I feel about it, just like our company feels about it, and I know many of you feel about it. And then everything else pretty much comes next. And strangely enough, price was like number 4 on the list. Okay, so if you're going to outsource, and you must outsource, it's important, the benefits are readily evident. What do you outsource? Only outsource to the core competency of your vendor. This goes back to getting to know them and knowing about them and knowing what they do well. You can't just go to anybody that says they can make it and trust that they'll be able to make it. The other thing to keep in mind is that outsourcing itself is a dynamic process. What you're outsourcing this year, you may or may not outsource next year, as innovations and the advance of science are ever increasing. So we make peptides. So I just made this very simplistic slide to kind of illustrate the point about what do you outsource. Now, don't worry so much about the facts of the dates, but in general, about in the 90s, amino acids, protected amino acids were considered innovative. Maybe earlier. This is illustrative. Then in about 2000, we had these short peptides, 2 or 6 amino acids in a row. This was considered quite innovative if you did that. Nowadays, it's the longer peptides. A lot of the new patent applications are for peptide APIs between 20 and 40 amino acids, or functionalized. That's innovation, and then in the future, we're assuming maybe proteins and other nanotechnologies. So what do you outsource? Bottom line, you outsource to the left, and you innovate to the right. So you as a company try to stay on the cusp of innovation and outsource the easy stuff to your partners. Okay, so why do we outsource? Benefits are readily obvious. Keeps the price low so that you can stay competitive. So what do you need to sustain market leadership? You need a low price, you need high quality, and you need to be an innovative company. And the low price just comes alongside with the outsourcing. But the other benefits, just in conclusion, quite obvious. You reduce your own capital expenditures, you reduce your infrastructure, and most importantly, probably, you can focus on what you do best, you can innovate, and you can move forward. That's it.